Monday morning started like any other day. I had just opened my laptop and was going through a few emails when my boss walked over to my desk. He looked at me and said, "Can we talk for a minute?" The moment I heard that, my stomach dropped. I tried to act normal, but my mind immediately started racing. Did I miss a deadline? Did I send the wrong version of the report? Did someone complain about something I said in the meeting? Was there a problem with the client rollout? By the time I stood up, I had already imagined about 5 different ways I might have messed up. On the way to his office, I started replaying everything I had done that week. I remembered the client email I had not answered yet. I remembered the spreadsheet I had updated late on Friday. I even wondered if I had forgotten to copy someone on an important message. When we got to his office, he closed the door and said, "Have a seat." That did not make me feel any better. He opened his laptop and said, "I wanted to check in with you about the client rollout." Then he asked, "Where are we on this?" I told him we were mostly on track, but we were still waiting on final approval from the client. He nodded and asked, "Do you think we can still hit the original deadline?" I said I thought we could, as long as the approval came through by the end of the day. Then he paused and said, "I noticed the timeline changed on Friday." He asked, "Was that on your radar?" I told him yes, but I was under the impression that the client was going to approve everything before the weekend. When that did not happen, I should have followed up sooner. I knew that part was on me. He said, "I am not bringing this up to blame you." Then he added, "I just want to make sure we are on the same page." He explained that if a deadline might slip, he wanted to know before it became a bigger problem. He said, "Going forward, keep me in the loop, even if you are still waiting on someone else." He also said, "If something comes up, just give me a heads up sooner rather than later." I told him that made sense and that I would handle it differently next time. I also explained that part of the delay happened because 2 teams were working from different versions of the schedule. He asked, "How did that happen?" I said one team had the updated file, but the other team was still using the version from earlier in the week. He leaned back and said, "Okay, that explains the confusion." Then he asked, "Who is the point person on the client side?" I gave him the name and told him I had already reached out that morning. He said, "Good. Follow up again after lunch if you do not hear back." He told me not to let it sit until the end of the day. He said, "I would rather know early that we have a problem than find out at the last minute." Then he asked, "What is blocking you right now?" I told him the biggest issue was that we still did not have a final decision from the client. I also said the internal team was waiting for that decision before they could finish their part. He asked, "What do you need from me?" That question caught me off guard because I had expected criticism, not support. I told him I might need his help if the client did not respond by mid-afternoon. He said, "That is fine. If they do not respond, loop me in and I will escalate it." Then he asked me to walk him through exactly what had happened since Friday. I explained the timeline step by step. He listened without interrupting and then said, "Okay, I see where the handoff broke down." He told me that the goal was not to point fingers. He said, "Let's focus on fixing the process so this does not happen again." That made the conversation feel much more constructive. We talked about creating one shared tracker instead of having different teams update separate files. He suggested adding clear owners and due dates next to every major task. He also said, "If nobody owns it, it usually does not get done." I laughed a little because he was right. Then he asked me which part of the process I thought was most likely to cause another delay. I told him the client approval step was still the biggest risk. He said, "Good. Then that is the thing we need to stay on top of." He asked me to send a short status update to the team before lunch. He said it did not need to be long. He just wanted everyone to know what was done, what was still pending, and what the next step was. I told him I could do that. He said, "Perfect. Keep it simple and make the ask clear." He asked, "Can you give me a quick update before the end of the day?" I said, "Sure. Let me double check a few things and get back to you." Then I asked, "What is the priority here?" He said, "This one should come first." I asked, "When do you need this by?" He said, "Ideally by Thursday, but let me know if that is not realistic." I told him, "I am still waiting on a response from the client." He said, "No problem, just follow up with them and let me know what you hear." Before we moved on, he said, "Can you send that over to me when you get a chance?" I said, "Absolutely. I will take care of it." By that point, I had almost forgotten how nervous I had been when I walked in. I was starting to realize this was not a disciplinary conversation at all. Then he said, "There is something else I wanted to run by you. For some reason, that made me nervous all over again. He looked at me and said, "Your name came up in a leadership meeting yesterday." For about half a second, I thought the conversation was about to get worse. Then he smiled and said, in a good way. He told me that a few people had noticed how I handled a vendor issue the week before. Apparently, when the vendor missed a delivery, I had stepped in, called the right people, and helped get things back on track. He said, "You handled that really well." He also said, "You did not panic and you kept everyone updated." I was surprised because I had thought I was just doing my job. He said that senior managers notice people who can stay calm when things get messy. Then he said, "We have been thinking about giving you a little more responsibility." He asked, "How is your bandwidth this week?" I told him I had a few deadlines, but I could make room if something important came up. He asked me what was already on my plate. I walked him through my current priorities. He told me one of the smaller tasks could probably be pushed to next week. He said, "I do not want you saying yes to everything and then burning yourself out." That was another thing I was not expecting to hear. He told me that good employees sometimes create problems for themselves because they are afraid to say they are at capacity. He said, "If you do not have the bandwidth, tell me." He added, "I can help you reprioritize." Then he said, "I would like you to take the lead on the next rollout." He explained that I would be the main point of contact and would coordinate with the client, the internal team, and the vendor. He said, "I want you to take ownership of it from start to finish." I asked what success would look like. He said he wanted clear communication, early risk flags, and no surprises at the last minute. He said, "You do not need to solve every problem yourself." He said, "But I do need you to make sure the right people know when there is a problem." I asked what the timeline looked like. He said the kickoff would probably happen early next week. He wanted me to put together a rough plan before our next meeting. He said, "Nothing fancy. Just give me the main milestones, the risks, and who needs to be involved." I asked if he wanted me to send it by email or walk him through it. He said, "Send me a draft first, and then we can go over it together." He also told me not to wait until the draft was perfect. He said, "Give me something we can react to." That sentence was useful because I had a habit of overthinking things before sharing them. Before I left, he said, "One more thing." My heart jumped again. He laughed and said, "Relax. You are doing fine." Then he added, "I just want you to speak up sooner when you see a problem." He said, "You do good work, but do not wait until you have a perfect answer before you raise your hand." He reminded me that bad news does not usually get better just because you wait to share it. He said, "If you think something is slipping, flag it early." He also said, "I would much rather adjust the plan on Tuesday than explain a missed deadline on Friday." That sentence stayed with me. I realized I had been treating every problem like something I needed to solve completely before telling anyone. But in a real workplace, keeping people informed is often just as important as fixing the problem itself. We agreed to touch base the next morning. He told me to keep him posted if the client replied before then. As I stood up to leave, he said, "Thanks for taking this on." I walked back to my desk, feeling completely different from the way I had felt 10 minutes earlier. I had gone into that office convinced I was in trouble. I came out with clearer feedback, a new responsibility, and a much better understanding of what my boss expected from me. A few minutes later, the client finally replied. The approval had come through. I sent my boss a quick message saying, "Good news. We got the approval and we are still on track," he replied. "Great. Thanks for the update. It was such a small message, but this time I understood exactly why it mattered." I had kept him in the loop before he had to ask. That one conversation changed the way I handled problems at work. I stopped waiting until I had every answer before giving an update. I started giving people a heads up when something looked risky. I got better at saying what was blocked, what I needed, and what the next step was, and I learned that asking for help early is not the same as admitting failure. Sometimes it is simply good communication. That is the thing about office English. Sometimes a simple sentence like, "Can we talk for a minute?" can sound terrifying when you do not know what is coming next. But real office conversations are rarely as simple as good or bad. They are often about expectations, priorities, deadlines, ownership, feedback, and keeping people informed. The more of this language you hear in context, the easier it becomes to understand what people actually mean. And the next time your boss says, "Can we talk for a minute?" maybe your first thought will not be, What did I do wrong? Maybe you will just take a breath, walk into the room, and find out what the conversation is actually about. If this kind of real-life office English helps you feel more confident at work, subscribe and come back for the next episode.